from playing guitar to being Alfie to, playing dodgeball, all the stuff, right? I mean, if you're not involved and you want to be involved with some of the things that happen on Sunday morning, like, go talk to Kara afterwards. Where's Kara? Kara, right there. There's Kara. You know Kara. She spoke earlier. Talk to her, and she'll get you plugged in to the right people who are in charge. And we really want you guys to continue to find ways to, this is your service. This is why we did Elevate, so that you guys can be a part of the worship, so you guys can be a part of the planning and the skits and the videos and all of those things. And if you're new for the first time, we have at the guest center free pizza and a free drink at Trattoria. And if you want that, Kara will tell you how. It's very easy. You just give us your email or your cell phone or ways we can contact you, and there you go, free pizza, free drink. So it's pretty cool. Talk to Kara afterwards. So we're in this series called Fallen Heroes. And if you remember last week, if you're here, we talked about Samson. This week, as you know, Alfie told us, of course, right? We're going to be talking about Moses. And this week I sent out some text messages. Probably some of you received those. If not, you got to get on my cell phone list so I can hit you a text message. But I asked 3 questions. And I'm going to repeat those for all of you guys so you can hear what they were. They were this: if a burning bush started talking to you, how would you respond? Of course, I got crazy answers, like first I'd give it a head nod, which is what I do to Lance. And then, do you have a permit for this fire, I would say. Somebody said they'd pull up a chair and roast a s'more. Somebody said they'd call the fire department and then the ambulance for themselves. And a lot of people liked burning stuff, like textbooks and all kinds of stuff was coming into my phone. I would throw my books in the fire. I would throw my, I was like, wow, people love burning stuff. The second question I asked was, what's your worst public speaking experience? Maybe you've had one, maybe you haven't. I remember my worst. I was in 5th grade, and for some reason, I was really tall in 5th grade, taller than most. So they casted me in the spring musical to be King Daniel. And King Daniel had a solo. And I don't sing. I never have. And for whatever reason, the music teacher thought, he can do it. Wouldn't say it was the worst day of my life, but like that nervous sweat for like 4 weeks. Yeah, I had that. Maybe you've been at a spelling bee, or maybe you've tripped when walking up, or something happened and it got you all flustered and you forgot what you were going to say, so you had to make it up. Or, I don't know, you had to dress up like Ben Franklin, and the costume was so hot that you were just sweating and miserable, like you were going to faint, right? We all have those things. The last question I asked was, how do you keep a baby afloat in a basket on the Nile River? And baby jokes aren't funny, so we're going to just leave that one. So in this series, Fallen Heroes, we're talking about how God uses people who have flaws, who aren't perfect, but in the end it's their faith, right, that God prizes. And so Samson, last week we talked about him, we talked about his faith. Today we're going to talk about Moses. And I learned something new this morning. I didn't know there were clouds of frogs, like the frog cloud that's green. Yeah, that was pretty cool. We learned a lot from Alfie. I'm not going to repeat a lot because the story of Moses is chapters long in the Old Testament. And maybe you've seen, the Prince of Egypt, or maybe you've read something or watched the 10 Commandments. We don't have time right now to go through the whole entire story, and I know you have questions. So if you have a question specifically that's already popped, in small groups later, ask your leader, and we'll get you an answer to that, or we'll come back to it. But really where I want to focus is on this. How did Moses go from being raised as a prince of Egypt for 40 years, like Alfie told us, 40 years he was raised in the home, in line to be the next Pharaoh. Right? He had the best education. He had the best knowledge and tactics about how to do war and military and all of those things. How did he get out of that? How did God move him out of that time, out of the house of the Pharaoh, and then into the role as the leader of the Israelites. For the Israelites, God would use Moses to free them from the slavery of the Egyptians. And for 40 years, Moses lived in that home as under the Pharaoh. And for 40 years, he was in the desert because he killed a man. And then for 40 years, he spent trying to free the people of Israel and take them to the land that God had promised. And so over those 120 years, right, there's a ton of stuff that's happened. And so we want to focus in on kind of that story today, right around where Moses is called to go and free the people. And that happens, as Alfie told us, right, at the burning bush. That was the moment where God kind of said, Moses, I want you to go and free my people. I want you to go and free my people. And remember, Moses wasn't 13, he wasn't 14, he was 40 when he killed the guy. And for 40 years, he went to the desert. So at this time at the burning bush, he's 80 years old. And I think a lot of times I always think back, oh, I think, yeah, Moses is like that 25-year-old guy who's ready to take on the world. But he was 80 years old. And I think that's significant. So when we look at this story at the burning bush, there's a couple things that are going on. Right before, this is an important part, right before Moses killed the Egyptian for beating up one of his own people, there's a verse in Exodus that says this. It says, one day Moses had grown up. He's 40. He's grown up. He went out among the people, maybe from the palace, and he noticed the day that his people, the Hebrews, the people of God, were in slavery. And it says he looked on their burdens and had compassion. God was working inside of Moses before he even got right to that burning bush later on where he's called. This is 40 years before. Moses, I think, from just studying his story, I think he had a lot of pride, is what it comes down to at that point in his life. The first phase of his life, the first 40 years, right, he had that education. He had everything. He was the son of Pharaoh. I can relate to that. I went to a private school. I had most of the things I needed in life. I figured that, you know what, at some point when you turn 18, I can do this on my own. I got it. I don't need anybody else. I'm going to go get a job, right? I think pride is one of those things. It's easy. It sneaks into life. And I think Moses knew, Moses had this pride. And what he does, even though he had this incredible burden and passion for his people, he does try to take matters into his own hands, and he makes a mistake, and he kills a man. And so for 40 years, he goes into the desert, and he goes from a prince to a shepherd. And so everything that he was, that 40 years that he had built his life on as a prince, I mean, just, it's gone like that. And I'm like, man, how do you, what would it have been like to go from here to here? I mean, a shepherd, I can't imagine a worse job. Staring into the desert, day after day. I bet God did a lot of speaking to Moses in those 40 years. And I think that what was happening was that God was breaking down that pride. And there was this process that God was removing the pride and bringing in humility, or making Moses into the humble person that we will see later in life. I don't want to be broken by God for 40 years, right? I don't want to be broken by God for 40 seconds. But brokenness in this story is a really good thing. Brokenness really means that I'm going to surrender and give God the control. And so, instead of taking things into my own hands, like Moses did early on, what does he do? God's going to show him, you know what, Moses? You have it all. You have the education. You have the knowledge. You know how to lead. You're the best military guy probably was ever born to Pharaoh. But you're missing one thing. You're missing humility. And when you have that, you're going to be the greatest leader that will ever walk the face of the earth. And then we have, I want to go back to this idea of pride, because it's important. I want to make a distinction real quick. Pride can be good, right? You take pride in something, you do your work well, you do it with excellence. That is all, like, you take pride in, those are all really, really good things. What happens with Moses, and the distinction I'm trying to make with Moses is this, that basically it's going from not listening to God to listening to God. And that's the big difference. And that's kind of the pride that we're talking about. Moses had to realize that his strength and dependence and all those things would ultimately come from God. Because pride, when it gets to that point where it's everything in our life and it's who we are and our life, we're consumed with ourselves, pride always focuses on ourselves and we tend to focus less on God. So Moses was going through this 40 years of being broken in the desert. And then God shows up at the burning bush. And this is like where God's going to call him, go and free the people. And we talked about that earlier. And I have 3 verses. And it's interesting, the encounter that Moses has with God. Because we see some question, and we see some doubts, and we see Moses kind of like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. But the key thing here is that Moses doesn't get stuck in his questioning. He doesn't get stuck in his doubts. He doesn't get stuck in his fears. God gives him an answer. Moses takes that and moves on and becomes a great leader. So I want to show you some of the reaction that Moses had. Verse 10, it says, "So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses says to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" It's his first question. Maybe it's a fear. Maybe he's not really sure. What I think is that at this point, Moses really had his pride issue had kind of been dealt with. And now God needed to give him some confidence to move forward. And so that happens a lot where Moses needed to know for sure that God was on his side. And so God does some things here that are pretty cool. The next verse, it says, Moses answers. He asks another question. What if they don't believe? What if they don't believe me? Or listen to what I say? What if they say, the Lord did not appear to you? So Moses is saying, all right, I don't know if I can go and do this, because I'm going to go there and I'm going to say these things, and I'm going to say, and God told me to, and people are going to look at me and be like, yeah, right, God didn't tell you anything. How could God tell you that? Right? Can you resonate with Moses and his question? I can. Who wants to go up against Pharaoh? I mean, Moses probably knew, right? He lived in that household. He probably knew the power and what was at stake, and that you don't mess with Pharaoh, and you don't challenge him. And because Pharaoh had millions of Moses' people in slavery. He got it. I mean, there's a real concern there. There's a real fear. The next verse, in Exodus 4, it says, Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent." That means, as Alfie told us, not great with words. I'm not a good speaker, right? In public speaking, I'm the worst. He says, "Neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, I am slow of speech and tongue." I can't do it, God. I can't do it. And the Lord says to him, this is a great verse. He says, "Moses, who gave you this mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who makes you speak? Who causes you to be quiet? Who gives man sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will help you speak and teach you what to say." But Moses said, please send someone else to do it. I mean, it's just like, Moses, come on, right? Like, come on. And so this week, I've just kind of been like, so was Moses just like, what was his deal? Why wouldn't he just listen to God and do what God asked? Was he just a stubborn guy? Was he,